US pauses higher duties on most nations. Israel seizing large areas of Gaza amid renewed military offensive. Good afternoon and salam Malaysia Madani. This is World Today and my name is Daryl Baptist. In a stunning reversal, US President Donald Trump has decided to temporarily lower the hefty duties he had just imposed on dozens of countries while further ramping up pressure on China. Trump's turnabout, which came less than 24 hours after steep new tariffs kicked in on most trading partners, followed the most intense episode of financial market volatility since the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. The upheaval erased trillions of dollars from stock markets and led to an unsettling surge in US government bonds yields that appeared to catch Trump's attention. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent asserted that the pullback had been the plan all along to bring countries to the bargaining table. Trump, though, later indicated that the near panic in markets had factored into his thinking. Despite insisting for days that his policies would never change, he said there is a need to be flexible. However, he kept the pressure on China, the number 2 provider of US imports. Trump said he would raise the tariff on Chinese imports to 125% from the 104% level, further escalating a high-stakes confrontation between the world's 2 largest economies. The White House said Trump's reversal on the country's specific tariffs is not absolute. A 10% blanket duty on almost all US imports will remain in effect. The announcement also does not appear to affect duties on autos, steel and aluminium that are already in place. The 90-day freeze also does not apply on duties paid by Canada and Mexico. On a related note, Investment, Trade and Industry Minister Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz said Malaysia welcomes the United States' move to pause higher tariffs for numerous trading partners, while acknowledging that this volatility creates significant challenges for ASEAN economies. He said Malaysia is actively assessing the implications of these changes and remains dedicated to collaborating with ASEAN partners to mitigate disruptions, enhance regional economic resilience and advocate for balanced and predictable trade relations. He reiterated that ASEAN unity and regional economic integration will be more crucial than ever before, and that Malaysia welcomes the support of partners who share this vision and want to see the region thrive. He added Malaysia has been and will continue to be an open and reliable trading and investment partner to all nations, including China and the US. The country remains committed to open communication and to finding mutual beneficial solutions to the trade issues with the US. Following President Trump's shock move to pause the many new tariffs, Wall Street stocks rocketed higher, lifting an equity market beaten down by days of losses amid rising recession worries. Within moments of Trump's announcement, the S&P 500 soared 9.5% for its biggest daily gain since 2008, bringing some relief to investors worried about the global economic impact of US trade policies. Trump's reversal lifted the entire Dow index, with Nvidia the biggest gainer at 18.7%. Both Apple and Boeing piled on more than 15%, while Disney, Goldman Sachs and Nike were among the names winning more than 10%. The tech-rich Nasdaq won 12.2% to notch its best day in 24 years. Oil prices also jumped more than 4%, while the dollar also strengthened. A secondary factor in the positive US session was the successful auction of $38 billion in US Treasury notes. However, investors said uncertainty about the longer-term plan for tariffs persisted, leaving them to grapple with potential volatility ahead. The upcoming US quarterly reporting period will offer more insights into the health of corporate America, with several US banks, including JP Morgan Chase, due to report results on Friday. Meanwhile, South Korea has announced emergency support measures for its auto sector, seeking to reduce the blow of Trump's tariffs on a sector that has seen years of sharply rising exports to the United States. The measures include financial support for the auto industry, as well as tax cuts and subsidies to boost domestic demand, while the government also vowed efforts to negotiate with the US and help expand markets. To help prevent any liquidity issues, the government will raise policy financing support for automakers to $10.18 billion this year from the $8.8 billion previously planned.
자동차 산업은 34만 명의 일자리를 책임지는 우리 경제의 중수이고 2만여 개의 부품사로 이루어진 생태계는 한번 무너지면 회복이 어렵기 때문에 민관이 힘을 모아 반드시 지켜내야 합니다. 그간 정부는 업계와 대응책을 긴밀하게 논의하고 시급한 요청을 반영해 경영위기 지원, 수요 충격 대응, 투자 환경 개선 및 미래 기술력 확충 등을 중심으로 긴급 대책을 마련하였습니다.
The French government has cut its growth forecast for this year because of the uncertainty over world trade, just hours after US President Donald Trump paused the massive hike in tariffs. The government had forecast annual growth of 0.9% when presenting its 2025 budget, but Economy Minister Eric Lombard said it would be trimmed to 0.7%. Asked about a possible further downward revision, the minister said that would depend on the negotiations that will be initiated with the United States and the decisions that are taken on custom duties. Commenting on Trump's decision to pause the massive hike in tariffs, he said it was a good news, but France must remain calm, expressing hope to find a new agreement with the Americans. The Bank of France had already revised its growth forecast for this year to 0.7% in March, and the French Economic Observatory also lowered its forecast to 0.5%. The United States has backtracked on emergency food aid cuts it announced for 14 countries, restoring assistance to 6 of them. Previously, the United Nations World Food Programme said the United States was eliminating emergency food aid to 14 poor and otherwise troubled countries. The agency said the cuts amounted to a death sentence for millions of hungry or starving people. However, the United States has now reversed course and said it will continue sending food aid to Somalia, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq and Ecuador. Still, the World Food Programme said with aid now cut off for the other 8 countries, hunger will deepen, millions of lives will be lost, entire regions will be destabilized. These 8 countries are Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Niger, Yemen, Chad, Mali, Nigeria and Madagascar. The agency noted that in Afghanistan, for instance, food aid that is helping 2 million people could run out this year, and more than 400,000 malnourished women and children will lose nutritional treatment. It added as hunger reaches record levels, continued support from the US is vital. Hundreds of opposition supporters gathered in Istanbul against the arrest of dismissed Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu and other officials from the Republican People's Party, also known as CHP. This marked the first of a series of weekly rallies announced by CHP leader Özgür Özel, who criticized President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government as authoritarian. The protests were also sparked by the recent dismissal of Sicily's district's mayor, Resul Emrah Sahan, who was replaced by a government-appointed trustee. The move intensified public anger and calls for resistance against what protesters see as growing authoritarianism. Since İmamoğlu's arrest on 19th March, hundreds of thousands of Turks, including university students, have taken to the streets in largely peaceful demonstrations. However, authorities have detained nearly 2,000 people, with around 300 held in jail pending trial. According to protesters, they are standing up for democratic rights and the voice of the people. Still ahead, Ukraine accuses Russia of dragging China into war.
Cultivating urban farms for a sustainable future.
Recently, we are talking about addressing the mental health crisis within the healthcare system.
And then, of course, expectations from the public.
How these people are so into farming. Even
Cities grow and populations rise. There's the question of how we access food.
Welcome back. Israel said its troops are seizing large areas in Gaza and making the Palestinian territory smaller and more isolated, as an airstrike on a residential block killed at least 23 people. Israel's comments come weeks into a renewed offensive by its military on the war-battered territory, which has displaced hundreds of thousands, while an aid blockade has revived the spectre of famine for its 2.4 million people. Israel said large areas are being seized and added to Israel's security zones, leaving Gaza smaller and more isolated. It also said that Israel is encouraging plans for voluntary immigration in accordance with the vision of US President Donald Trump, which Israel is working to implement. Trump had earlier this year proposed a plan to develop Gaza into an international beach resort while displacing its population elsewhere, drawing widespread condemnation. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency, meanwhile, said an Israeli airstrike on a residential building in Gaza City killed at least 23 people, most of them women and children. The strike took place in the Shujaya neighborhood of Gaza City, where it was overcrowded with tents, displaced people and homes. Hamas condemned the strike as one of the most heinous acts of genocide. French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that France could recognize the state of Palestine as early as June during an international conference co-hosted with Saudi Arabia, likely to be held in New York. In a televised interview, Macron emphasized the need to advance the two-state solution, calling recognition of Palestine a moral and political necessity. Macron's remarks come amid mounting international calls for a political resolution to the conflict in Gaza, where Israel has killed more than 50,000 people since October 2023. Macron has previously stated that Palestinian statehood is not a taboo for France and stressed the importance of justice. Currently, 147 of 193 UN member states recognize Palestine, including 10 EU countries such as Spain, Ireland, Sweden and Hungary. More European nations may follow suit as global support for Palestinian recognition grows. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has condemned the Israeli authorities' decision to close 6 schools of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, or UNRWA, in Jerusalem. The OIC condemned Israel's decision as an illegal attempt to undermine the UN agency's role in the occupied city, calling it a blatant violation of the UN Charter and Resolution 302, subsection 4, which established the agency's mandate in December 1949. The OIC emphasized the decision would deprive Palestinian refugee children of their fundamental rights to education and seek instead to impose the Israeli curriculum on them. The OIC urged all states to support UNRWA with political, financial and legal assistance to continue serving millions of Palestinian refugees and protecting their rights as outlined in UN Resolution 194. Israeli authorities previously notified 6 UNRWA schools in Jerusalem's neighborhoods of Shuafat, Silwan, Sur Baher and Wadi al-Joz that they will be closed within 30 days. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia was dragging China into the war in Ukraine, as he accused Beijing of knowing that dozens of its citizens were being recruited by Moscow's army to fight. Zelensky said Kyiv had details of more than 150 Chinese nationals who were deployed to the front after previously claiming Ukraine's army had captured 2 Chinese citizens fighting in the eastern Donetsk region. He did not accuse Beijing of having directly sent the soldiers, but said Chinese authorities were aware they were being recruited. He said Ukraine is ready to release the captured Chinese citizens in exchange for Ukrainian prisoners of war held in Russia. Zelensky noted that such an overt involvement of Chinese citizens in combat operations on the territory of Ukraine is a deliberate step towards expanding the war. He added this is yet another indication that Moscow simply needs to drag out the fighting. The fresh criticism of both Russia and China came hours after Beijing rejected the idea that its citizens had been recruited in big numbers to fight with Russia and warned Chinese nationals to avoid involvement in armed conflicts. Saudi Arabia's top diplomat held talks in Washington, laying the groundwork for a visit by US President Donald Trump, which would be the first foreign trip of his second term. Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan met with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the State Department, and the two called on the Sudanese army and paramilitary forces to resume peace talks. The diplomats agreed that the Sudanese armed forces and rapid support forces must return to peace talks, protect civilians, open humanitarian corridors, and return to civilian governance. The call came after the Sudanese army said it had retaken full control of the capital, Khartoum, after weeks of attacks by the paramilitaries. The Rapid Support Forces has been battling the army since April 2023, and the war has created what the United Nations describes as the world's worst hunger and displacement crisis. More than 12 million people have been uprooted, tens of thousands killed, and a UN-backed assessment declared famine in parts of the country. The US, under Joe Biden's administration, and the Saudis have previously sponsored several unsuccessful rounds of negotiations to end the bloody conflict. India's meteorological department has issued severe heatwave alerts across many parts of western and northern India, including Delhi, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh. Dozens of cities recorded temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius this week as the hot weather arrived earlier than usual. In the Indian capital of New Delhi, people turned to coolers and refreshments during their visit to the Indian Gate War Memorial as temperatures hit over 40 degrees Celsius. The meteorological department has issued a yellow alert, which means that the heat is tolerable for general public, but can cause moderate health concerns for infants, the elderly, and people with chronic diseases. People have been advised to avoid heat exposure, wear lightweight and breathable cotton clothing, and cover their heads with a cloth or umbrella when outdoors. Northern India usually sees heat waves between April and June, but in recent years, global warming and climate change have caused extreme temperatures to arrive earlier and last longer. Last month, the meteorological department said most parts of India would experience an intense heat wave this summer, with higher than normal temperatures expected across most of the country. Tourism activities in areas near Mount Kanalawan in Philippines' Negros Occidental are suspended to ensure the safety of both residents and tourists. In an advisory, the Department of Tourism said it is now closely coordinating with involved local government units to prioritize the safety and well-being of individuals affected by the 8th of April explosive eruption of Mount Kanlaon through monitoring and immediate response. Other areas experiencing ashfall include portions of Guimaras, Iloilo, and Antique. The department also advised tourists to postpone any travel plans to these locations and to adhere to the safety measures established by local authorities. The tourism agency also urged the public to maintain vigilant and adhere to official advisories amid the volcanic unrest. The Department of Tourism, meanwhile, reported that all tourist accommodations and infrastructures in the affected areas are still structurally sound. To date, no stranded tourists have been logged as Mount Kanlaon remains at alert level 3 out of a scale of 5. Next up in sports, Aaron and Woo Yik make commanding start at Badminton Asia Championships. We begin with smashing news in badminton. National men's doubles duo Aaron Chia and So Woo Yik made a commanding start to their Badminton Asia Championships campaign in Ningbo, China by marching to the second round. The tournament, held at the Ningbo Olympic Sports Center Gymnasium, saw the six-seeded pair toiling over a 40-minute duel before disposing Japan's Kenya Mitsuhashi and Hiroki Okumura 21-18, 21-15 in straight sets to stretch their unbeaten run against the Japanese combination to a dominant 4-0. Next up for the former 2022 world champions in the second round are lesser-known Indian pair Hariharan Amsakarunan and Ruben Kumar Retina Sabapati, who outplayed Sri Lanka's Maduka Dulanjana and Lahiru Weerasinghe 21-3, 21-12. Meanwhile, despite their best efforts, national number one women's doubles pair, Pearly Tan and M. Tina, once again found themselves up against a brick wall as they were unable to break the jinx against Kim Hai-jeong and Kong Hee-yong, losing 19-21, 26-28 in 58 minutes. This marks their third straight loss to the South Korean pair, who previously took them down in the semi-finals of the India Open 21-18, 21-18 last January. Moving on to football, imperious Barcelona thumped visitors Borussia Dortmund 4-0 in their Champions League quarter-final first leg after Robert Lewandowski netted twice against his old club to earn the Catalans a sizable lead. The treble-chasing Barca predictably dominated the opening stages and grabbed the lead following Rafinha's strike in the 25th minute. A string of saves from Dortmund keeper Gregor Kobel frustrated Barca for the remainder of the first half. Barcelona emerged more determined following the break, and it took them only 3 minutes to score the second, with Rafinha assisting Lewandowski, who nodded home from close range. The Polish striker extended their lead in the 66th minute from just inside the box, while Lamine Yamal wrapped up another demolition job by Barcelona in the 77th minute. Yamal deservedly got on the score sheet as the visitors left themselves wide open and Rafinha sent the youngster through on goal. Hansi Flick's Barca are a step away from reaching the semi-finals for the first time since 2019 and extended their unbeaten run to 23 matches. They are aiming to seal a Final Four clash against Inter Milan or Bayern Munich when they visit Germany next Tuesday. In another match, Paris Saint-Germain were made to sweat to secure a 3-1 win over Aston Villa in the first leg of their Champions League quarter-final, coming from behind after a shock opener from the visitors. Emiliano Martinez had his presence felt, blocking Vitinha's low shot and denying Ousmane Dembele, whose venomous half-volley seemed destined to rattle the net. 2 saves in quick succession, and the Villa keeper was proving his worth early on. High up the pitch, PSG was suffocating Villa, swarming them with intent. It was Villa, however, who converted first on their first clear chance. A mistake from Nuno Mendes in midfield allowed John McGinn to pounce, nicking the ball and slipping it to Yuri Tillemans. The Belgian looked up, saw the gap and whipped across into the path of Morgan Rogers, who finished it off with an ice-cool tap-in. 4 minutes later, PSG levelled when Desire Doué curled one in from the edge of the box, sending the ball sailing over the grounded Martinez and under the bar. The hosts continued to press following the break, and after a superb combination in the midfield, Kvicha Kvarsett-Vishila fired a shot that went in off the inside of the near post to make it 2-1. Mendes netted 2 minutes into added time when he cut inside Ezri Konsa and slotted past Martinez, who left the pitch with his head down. In the Premier League, Liverpool are making progress on talks over a new contract for Mohamed Salah, and the Premier League leaders are increasingly confident he will stay at Anfield next season. The 32-year-old Egypt international is out of contract at the end of this season, along with Liverpool teammates Virgil van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold. While Alexander-Arnold has been linked strongly with a free transfer to Real Madrid, Van Dijk said after Sunday's loss to Fulham that negotiations are progressing over a much-discussed new deal for the club captain. It is understood that no agreement has yet been struck, but there is optimism Salah and Van Dijk will extend their contracts. Salah is the top scorer in the Premier League this season with 27 goals and has netted 243 times in 394 appearances for the Reds since joining the club from Roma in 2017. He has won the Champions League with Liverpool and helped the club end a 30-year English title drought in 2020, lifting 8 trophies in total during his time on Merseyside. The two-time African Footballer of the Year has been linked with a lucrative move to Saudi Arabia, but has always made it clear his preferred option is to remain at Liverpool. In tennis, Novak Djokovic rued a horrible performance as he crashed out of the Monte Carlo Masters in his opening match. The 5th-ranked Djokovic struggled to find his rhythm in a 6-3, 6-4 loss to Chilean Alejandro Tabilo in the second round, making an inauspicious start to his clay season. Djokovic went into the tournament hampered by an eye infection that has been troubling him since the semi-finals in Miami at the end of March, and admitting that he did not have very high expectations for Monte Carlo. As it transpired, a sluggish performance meant that Tabilo, who also beat Djokovic on clay in last year's Italian Open in Rome, faced few difficulties in claiming a rare 2-love head-to-head record against the 24-time Grand Slam winner. The Serb, who is chasing his 100th ATP title, has not won a tournament since taking gold at last year's Paris Olympics. Djokovic, however, brushed off any fitness concerns and said his main focus for the clay season is the French Open. He is set to play in Madrid later this month for the first time since 2022. Tabilo, ranked 32 in the world, will face Bulgarian Grigor Dimitrov in the last 16. And with that, we wrap up this edition of World Today. In our top story, US pauses higher duties on most nations. Tune in to Malaysia Tonight, coming up at 8:30 p.m. on TV1 and Saluran Berita RTM. Till then, my name is Daryl Baptist. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you for watching and have a good day ahead. Goodbye.